might be a good, not self-serving reason to spend your personal quiet time looking for spiritual quotes to put up on Instagram, but it's much more likely that you are suffering from a serious condition. A condition that many North American Christians also suffer from. It's called pietism. Not piety. If you have piety, you're fine. Piety is the outward manifestation of an internal reverence. Piety involves things like church-going and Bible reading and prayer, but also generosity and loving your neighbor, your literal neighbor, and things like composting and not shouting at the referee in your kid's basketball game. Pietism, that goes way back to the Reformation. It was a reaction against the stiff formalism and the spiritual complacency of the established churches. The Pietists wanted a more emotional, more experiential faith, and Pietism is still with us today. It places a strong emphasis on personal religious experience, individual faith, and practical Christian living. And in today's context, it can be a symptom of a serious worldview problem. One name for this problem is called Christian dualism. We've talked about this. Those infected with this condition hold to the idea that our life is made up of two distinct parts. One part includes all the God stuff, and the other part is everything else. We call it ordinary life. And these two are completely separate. And the idea is that Christians ought to be prioritizing the God stuff over the ordinary stuff. Lots of screwed up ideas come out of this faulty worldview. As we've previously discussed, what's wrong with this worldview is that it limits the sovereignty of God. God gets Sunday, but he doesn't get the rest of the week, and more things like that. Once we start dividing reality up into chunks, it can be really hard to stop. Pietism creates two related categories, the inner and the outer life. Pietism accepts the division between the sacred and the secular, and then moves the sacred, or spirituality, inside, into the hearts of the individual believer. So the external physical world of everyday life gets less of an emphasis. But shouldn't we as Christians be focusing on the inner spiritual life? For so many of us, the answer to that question is obviously yes. But the answer is no, it shouldn't be. We've talked about this. God is interested in all of life, not just the inner bit. Jesus is not the Lord of our heart. He is the Lord of our whole life and everything. Pietism is behind the idea that Jesus is my personal savior, and the idea that personal quiet time is central to how one does Christianity. It follows then that one's stance toward the world is one of self-denial and rejection of the world. And then the outward manifestations of your spirituality becomes what you don't do rather than what you do. You see that chain? And they'll know we are Christians by what we don't do. One of the problems with pietism is that it gets us to think that the more we deny things, the more spiritual we are, and the better Christian we are. And this often leads to legalism. We get this idea that we gain God's approval by adherence to this code of conduct that we made up. No drinking, no smoking, no dancing, no engaging in or affirming this or that sexual sin. And we say of the people that adhere to this code, that's a very spiritual person. If we don't separate the sacred and the secular, if we don't separate the inner and the outer life, a spiritual person is understood entirely differently. They would read the Bible and come to the Lord in prayer, but they don't stop there. These are not merely inner activities, but part of discerning the good and the true and the beautiful in a world without that separation. We need this discernment because the world is complicated this way. The spiritual person sees through a spiritual and a moral lens, but this does not lead to detachment from the world, but an engagement with the world. She sees a need or injustice and then gets to work through the power of Christ to address that need or injustice. Notice her sleeves are rolled up and her hands are dirty. The sick and the lame and the blind are cared for. The outcast is invited to the table. Enemies are loved, injustices are righted, and the demons flee. And these kinds of spiritual people get together and work with others like themselves, others who also let the king call the shots. And together they are called the church. And the kingdom begins to change the world. This is what the ongoing work of Christ's redemption looks like. It's a holistic spirituality. It involves the inner and the outer life. The two are inseparable. Yes, the Bible demands our holiness, but that holiness is holistic as well. It involves morality, but also righteousness and justice. All stuff is God stuff. Everything belongs to God. So throw away your devotion books that focus only on the inner life. A holistic spirituality takes us from our knees and opens up our folded hands and takes us out of the church doors for us to join Christ's work to redeem the world he loves. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.